Sorry about that ranting and raving, but yeah. Okay, now I was basically trying to tell you yesterday that Hobbes should be considered a modern thinker because it is because of him that the idea of natural rights and consequently what followed as rights of different varieties, including human rights, came into being. And you also will say he's modern because he's an individualist. Unlike Aristotle, who said what is good for society is good for the individual, Hobbes doesn't agree with that. He believes that every individual should be allowed to pursue his or her own good. So he's definitely an individualist. Okay. And there are different interpretations. The two most important ones for us are the ones that were given by Michael Oakeshott and C.B. Macpherson, Crawford Bruff Macpherson. Okay, just write C.B. Macpherson, that's enough. Okay, these are the two which are more important. But even in those two, it is Macpherson, not just my personal opinion. I don't teach my personal opinions. Let's be clear about that. Macpherson's interpretation of Hobbes is considered to be the most accurate. Different people have interpreted him in different ways. I wish I had the time to teach you all those, but Macpherson's is considered to be the most sustainable interpretation of Hobbes's system of philosophy. Now, Hobbes talks about what he calls a state of nature. Okay, that is where we have to begin if we have to understand this state of the philosophy of Hobbes. We have to begin with his state of nature. You must consider that the state of nature in Hobbes is something which is pre-social. It is pre-social in the sense that there is no society in the state of nature. If there is society, then there is interdependence of people. Okay, there is interdependence among people. This is not like that. Okay, the state of nature is for him a war of all against all because it's not a social state. There is no society. And in the absence of society, in the absence of rules that regulate society, he says the state of nature is a war of all against all. And because of the fact that the state of nature is a war of all against all, life in the state of nature is solitary. There's no society, so you're alone. Nasty, you understand? Nasty is not very nice. It's bad. Brutish, a brute is uncivilized. And short, because everybody is fighting with everybody. People don't live for a very long time. Hobbes anticipated a question here. Okay, he anticipated a question. What if somebody asks me, how did these people come into being in the first place if there is no society? If man is solitary, how did he come into being? So he says, and I quote him, he says, people in the state of nature come into being like mushrooms sprouting out of the ground. That's what he said. To justify the pre-social state of nature, he said these people come into being like mushrooms. Mushrooms are wild growth. They are not planted. Now they are doing mushroom cultivation also. That's a different issue. Okay, but otherwise mushrooms just, they are wild. They grow anywhere where the conditions are uh, conducive for them to grow. So he compared human beings to mushrooms that sprout out of the ground. And that's why life is solitary, nasty, brutish, and short. Having said that, he says that all these people, though they are sprouted out like mushrooms, they have natural rights in the state of nature only. Obviously, if natural rights are given, then it doesn't matter. They are there in the state of nature. That is how the vocabulary of natural rights began. And please keep this in mind, because when we go a little further, when we go to the utilitarians, there is a challenge to the notion of natural rights. There is a challenge to the notion of rights itself, if you're David Hume. But let's not go ahead of ourselves. Let us talk about this particular thing, which is the state of nature. The state of nature gives natural rights. So what are these natural rights? Natural rights are those which have been given to you to sustain yourself, which means anything that is there in nature belongs to you. If there is an apple tree and there are apples, then you very well have the right to go pluck that apple and eat. You don't need anybody's permission for that. Okay? If you want to dig a hole, if you want to dig a hole in the ground, you have a right to do that. Nobody can stop you. Dig a hole in the ground. You want to move one stone from one place to another place, go ahead and do it. You have a right to do it. Nobody can stop you. So, natural rights are endowments of nature given to man or human beings. And they are endowments given to enjoy the resources of nature, mainly for sustenance. Mainly for sustenance. You have to eat, isn't it? Without eating, you can't survive. So, if you want to eat fruit, go ahead and eat fruit. If you find vegetables, go ahead, take those vegetables, eat them. Or if you prefer eating meat, kill an animal and eat. No problem. Nature has given you the right to do all these things. These are natural rights. And these are in accordance with laws of nature. Isn't this what animals do? Isn't this what animals do? If you see Discovery Channel or National Geographic Channel, you will see, if you look at the wildlife programs, this is what animals do. So the existence in the state of nature is like that of an animal. It is like how animals are controlled by laws of nature. Human beings are also controlled by laws of nature, and they have the right to do whatever they want with products of nature. So now that we have established that natural rights is what contributes to how the state of nature is. No, actually, I haven't. You must understand that because of these natural rights, there is a problem. The problem is that people all have natural rights. So if there is an apple tree on which there are 10 apples, and there are, say, 20 individuals who want to eat those apples, then they fight with each other to get the apple to eat. Okay? People fight to eat meat. Look at the programs on the about the Serengeti. The Serengeti is the savanna of Africa. What happens there? The lions do the killing. As soon as the lions kill an animal, immediately a pack of hyenas will come. They'll come and try to steal the food from the lions. The lions will be 5 or 6. The hyenas will be 20 or 30. And the hyenas have the strongest jaws in the world. So even the lions are not, they don't take the hyenas very lightly. They do fight the hyenas, but only up to a point. After that, if they find that they are losing, they give up the kill and go away, and the hyenas eat them, eat that kill. Okay, so that is the conflict. So there's always conflict in nature. So the state of nature that Hobbes is talking about is a conflict-ridden state of nature. People fight over things because of scarcity. Remember this word, scarcity, because if you do behavioralism later on, if you do David Easton's systems theory, you will find that David Easton also says that there is an authoritative allocation of resources to people who are closer to the political system because of scarcity. There is less, and the number of people wanting it is more. So scarcity principle comes right down into the 20th century, into the middle of the 20th century. And as far as American political science is concerned, even today that is an important variable. American political scientists have written articles about how there will be wars in the future in India, how there will be wars in the future in countries such as the West Asian countries for water. In India, they said so many people, very little land. So how are we going to grow food that is enough for all of us? So they say scarcity. And that's going to lead to civil war in India. That is the prediction, not mine, of American political scientists like Robert Putnam, Samuel Huntington. This is what they say. So scarcity is a principle that is still used. That is the principle that Hobbes used for the first time. And he said people will fight because resources are scarce and everybody wants to survive. And he says it is a dark irony, IRONY. It's a dark irony that in the fight for survival, some people will perish. Okay? In the fight to survive, people perish, means they die. That, he says, is an irony. You're trying to keep yourself alive. But what is the result? Death. That is called an irony. So he calls it a dark irony. But he makes a concession. He says human beings are different from other animals. And how are they different from other animals? They are different from other animals in the sense that they have been endowed with this capacity for rationality. They've been endowed with this capacity for rationality, and therefore rational thinking or ratiocination. You know, I have to make a small point here. Hobbes fancied himself as a mathematician like Plato for some reason. He thought it was extremely great if you were a philosopher who is also a mathematician. Unfortunately, he was a very, very poor mathematician. So not too many people know that Hobbes tried to be a mathematician. If you actually read his Leviathan, there is some primitive maths in it, which even a fourth and fifth class student can understand. He tried to be a mathematician. So he keeps using the term ratiocination. Ratiocination is rationality, but abstract. 1:2 is as to 4:8. That is ratiocination. You know that, right? 1:2 is to is a colon, is as to is 4 dots. So that's ratiocination. It is one's ability to think rationally, abstractly. So he fancied himself to be a mathematician. And so he said, human beings are capable of ratiocination, but we'll take it as rationality. Okay. And because of the human beings possessing this, what do we say? Possessing the ability to be rational, they realize that the state of nature is detrimental to their comfort and longevity. If you're fighting all the time and perishing in fighting for your survival, what is the point? So people are rational, unlike other animals. They therefore realize that the state of nature is something that is against their comfort and longevity. This is where we have the fundamentality of human nature argument in Hobbes. He's saying fundamentally all human beings are rational. Okay, so that's a fundamental principle. There is no human being who is not rational. So he's using the deductive method, like I said, influence of Plato. Okay, the deductive method is that all, if you are a human being, you have to be, all human beings are rational. If you're rational only, you're a human being. If you're not a human being. That's what he will say. And Hobbes believed that all human behavior is a result of two fundamental drives again. Everybody possesses them. When you say something is fundamental, it is basic. It is there in everyone. So apart from the rational faculty, there are these two drives that he talks about, which every human being possesses. And these drives are what he calls appetite and aversion. Appetite is feeling hungry, wanting to have something. Aversion, I don't like it. I have an aversion to lizards. If there's a lizard in the room, I can't sit. Okay, I cannot sit in the room peacefully if there is a lizard. I cannot sleep in that room if there is a lizard. So people put meshes to keep mosquitoes out. I put meshes to my house to keep lizards out. So that is aversion. So we don't like things, we stay away from them, or we try to keep them away from us. So he says these are the two fundamental drives: appetite and aversion. People move towards that which is appetizing and away from that which is aversive, that which they find to be aversive. Okay, keep this also in mind, because Bentham's philosophic calculus is a salute to this particular argument of Hobbes. Jeremy Bentham, whom we'll be studying in the 5th unit, he talks about pleasure and pain. People seek pleasure and avoid pain. That is nothing but a salute to this particular idea that people basically go towards things that they like and away from things that they dislike. Appetite and aversion. These are again fundamental. Along with rationality, these two things are also what make human beings have a nature which is fundamental, because they are there in the state of nature itself. They are present in the human being in the state of nature itself. And these two drives, aversion and ability, in conjunction with the rational ability, become the most important reason for forsaking the state of nature, for human beings deciding that we should not be living in this state of nature. So, the rational ability of human beings makes them decide that we have to overcome this state of nature. The question then that comes is, how do we overcome this state of nature? You want to overcome it, fine, good. But how do you overcome it? You overcome the state of nature through this mechanism which he called the social contract. Okay, he called it the social contract. And that is why I said he's a modern thinker, because the idea of a contract is something which has everything to do with capitalism, which is a modern civilization's phenomenon. People talk about contracts in a capitalist society. You don't have contracts in pre-capitalist society. There are some theological writers, basically Christian thinkers, and a psychoanalyst who was actually influenced even by Marxism. So Erich Fromm, he's a German. He's considered to be a part of that which is called the critical theory school, about which, let's see, if we can talk about it later, we will. Okay. And he synthesized psychoanalysis and Marxist ideas. And in one of his books, he claims that the idea of social contract, or the idea of a contract, is not something that is unique to capitalism. Okay, that is his contention, as do the Christian thinkers. They say that the idea of a contract existed right from the days of Moses. Moses was apparently instructed by God to pick up Jewish slaves working in Egypt and take them to the land of milk and honey, which is the present day Israel. In those days, it was two parts. One was called Judea, 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 and the other part of it was called Samaria, Samaria, Judea and Samaria. And Judea is more important than Samaria, and therefore that religion got the name Judaism from Judea. Okay, so that's how it became Judaism. So while he was taking these people, the Jews, to Judea, they faced many hardships. They faced thirst, they faced hunger, they faced all kinds of problems. And at many points, they would tell Moses, listen, you're saying that you're going to take us to this land of milk and honey, where we're going to have things in plenty. But what is this? We are dying of thirst. We are dying of hunger here. And Moses used to disappear into some mountain, apparently to communicate with God. In fact, Moses is supposed to be the person who first used the term God, okay? Because he brought the 10 commandments. Check out the 10 commandments on the net, whatever they, I don't want to tell you them. It'll take a long time to tell you those things. If I start, then I'll start explaining each of them, which I don't want to do. Okay? The 10 commandments are thou shalt not do unto others what you shall not do unto yourself. Okay? Thou shalt not covet your neighbor's wife. Things like that. There are 10 of them. 10 commandments. And he would go into the mountains, and apparently he would pray to God and then tell God, listen, you have told me to take these people. Now they are questioning me. What am I to tell them? So God would say, okay, there is an oasis in that desert there. Go drink water from there. And when Moses used to come back with these, and when he came with the 10 commandments, the people whom he was, the band of people that he was taking with him, they asked him, who are you speaking to? Who is this person that you're talking to? Who is giving you all these commands? So Moses again went back to the mountain, prayed, and said, listen, I'm being asked, who is telling me all this? Who should I say is telling me all these things? So that voice, a celestial voice that only Moses could hear, said, tell them you are getting commands from God. God is there both in the Hebrew language and in the Yiddish, Yiddish language. And it means no name. The literal translation of God is no name, and by extension, no shape. That's why you can't see God. That's how the word God came into being. And then Eric Fromm and all say that there are so many instances when various Christian thinkers and various prophets all had some agreement with God. So contract is not something which is a new idea. But I would like to draw your attention to that and tell you that is a wrong way of looking at things. Because what you have, what Moses, if at all that story is real and he heard a voice, I would like to believe that maybe he was schizophrenic and he was hearing voices. But if he really did hear a voice and that voice told him, I'm God, and then this man went and bargained for things with that voice, it is a covenant. It is a covenant, an agreement, not a contract. A contract is binding. A covenant is not binding legally. No covenant is legally binding. A contract, on the other hand, is legally binding. If a refrigerator manufacturer tells you that I'm giving you a guarantee of 7 years on the compressor, and if you do not do anything to damage it, and if it gets damaged on its own, then I will replace the compressor or I'll repair the compressor free of cost. If the manufacturer doesn't honor this, then you can go to a consumer court, file a petition saying that I have been duped or cheated by this manufacturer. I have been cheated by this manufacturer. He's going back on the contract that we signed. So it is legally, the consumer court usually gives judgments in favor of people. Very rarely does it give judgments in favor of companies. It's usually people who get them. So there is a difference between a covenant and a contract. So what Eric Fromm and other not other and the Christian thinkers are confusing a contract for is not a contract but a covenant. So please remember that a contract continues to be a modern phenomenon. It is something which exists only in the modern capitalist period. That is when it becomes a contract. Till then, all agreements were covenants. They were not contracts. There were also other kinds of kings or princes. They signed treaties. They were treaties. They were not contracts. In Hobbes, the social contract is executed among all human beings in the state of nature. Okay. Hobbes says that every single person in the state of nature is party to this contract that is being executed. And the social contract in Hobbes is extremely unique because of the way in which it is executed. Okay. If you remember your first year syllabus, people would have told you differences between society and state. People would have told you society comes first, state comes later. But what you find in Hobbes is exactly the opposite of that. The social contract in Hobbes first creates a state and a sovereign authority. A sovereign authority, as you know, is an all-powerful authority. And then comes society. So it is not a state first and society later. In Hobbes, what you're seeing is you have the state first and the sovereign along with the state, and then we have the establishment of society, which is people living commodiously, peacefully. The social contract is an experimental methodology. It uses an experimental methodology. Okay. It is loosely based in the resolutive compositive method. How is it loosely based in the resolutive compositive method? See, when the Paduans took the clock apart. They didn't tell you what all they did when they were taking the clock apart. All they said was, we have solved the mystery of how this clock works. And they said, listen, it's got pulleys, it's got this, it's got gears, it's got threads, and they run to a certain timing, and thereby they show that the clock works and shows the time. They didn't sit and publicize how they took the parts apart and how the gear in the thing was, how it was rotating on a wheel. They didn't tell you all that. What Hobbes is also doing is similar to that. It's also there like in music. I don't know how many of you know how music is composed. Okay, when you compose music, what you do is you play several notes depending on whichever instrument. If you're doing Indian music, people prefer the harmonium. But in Western music, people prefer all kinds of instruments. So what people do is people basically play different. There are what are called scales, and on those scales you have different notes, and you play those different notes. You arrange them. If you don't like them, you change them. So you create what is first called a demo version. A demo is a demonstration version. Okay. A demonstration version is what you have first and foremost. And then you will say in this is not sounding, maybe it'll be better if we replace this with another note. Or, you know, a same note. For example, if you take a guitar, you can play a same set of notes which are called chords, chords. Chords are two or more notes played together. You can play, say, a chord called E minor at one position in the on the guitar fretboard where the strings are. You can also play it at another position by holding different strings, and that produces a different effect. The chord is the same, but the effect doesn't sound the same as when it is played here and it is here when it is played here. So you might think, I would want to rearrange that. Let me see which is sounding better. So you as a musician will compose the best of your, what you think is your best combination, and put it out to people to listen. When you listen to a song, you don't know what all has gone into the making of the song. We hardly ever know what has gone into the making of the song. Okay? Because we are not told about it. That is a rubbish process. It is something that nobody wants to see. How do I care if you struggle with playing here, playing there, or replacing an E minor with an F major? How does it matter? It really doesn't matter. I want to listen to the song. So you keep that part where you are actually doing the composition, you keep it away from the listener. What you show is how you have composed. The same thing with films. You shoot an angle and say a director like Mani Ratnam is supposed to be somebody who shoots with several cameramen, and he shoots one scene from different angles, and then he sees all those scenes and then decides which angle is looking the best and take that angle, and that comes to you to see. The 5 other things that he has shot and rejected, you don't get to see them. You don't get to see them. So that is how Hobbes is also working. And he's also working with the method of logical abstraction like Machiavelli. What did Machiavelli do? Machiavelli basically got rid of society. He saw people in a principality, in the prince. He saw people in a principality without looking at the society. By logically abstracting or taking it out and putting it aside for some time. Hobbes does the same thing. He does exactly the same thing. And that is why people are confused by Hobbes. Somebody like George Sabine, Sabine, not Sabine, it is Sabine. George Sabine questions Hobbes. He says, if people are rational, why are they in the state of nature first and foremost? If they are rational, they should not be in the state of nature at all. Why are they in the state of nature? Then he asks the question, how come it suddenly dawns on them that they are rational and that they can enter into a social contract? How does this happen? He says Hobbes's philosophy is full of loopholes. The explanation given for this by C.B. Macpherson is the best explanation. Macpherson says Hobbes is doing or following this methodology called the method called the method of logical abstraction. Hobbes is looking at his own times. He's not looking at the state of nature as a chronological state of nature. Chronological is chronos in Greek, is time principle. Chronological is that which follows the principle of time. Okay, that which follows the principle of time is called chronological. So, if you say there was a Mughal empire in India, that's a chronological thing. Okay, but you can also create what are called anachronisms, which is disturbing the time principle or breaking it. If you say Gandhi was an enemy of Akbar, then you're creating an anachronism. Gandhi and Akbar didn't exist in the same time. How can they be enemies? If you say Gandhi fought with Akbar, it must be somebody named Akbar, but not that Emperor Akbar. He couldn't have fought with him. They didn't live in the same time. So that is an anachronism. So Sabine also says, if this man is following a chronology, then it is also an anachronistic chronology. But he says, all in all, it is not sustainable. Macpherson says, no, it is sustainable. Why? Because what Hobbes is actually doing is looking at the England of its own time. The England of his own time was beset with civil war. There were different wars taking place. Feudalism was dying. A new civilization was coming up. The capitalist civilization was coming up. So it was a time of social upheaval. Okay? When a new society comes up and an old society is dying, it's not a peaceful time. It is usually something that happens because of, uh, tumult. It's a tumultuous time in society. So, the state of nature in Hobbes is the England of his own time. Hobbes is asking himself this question. There is authority here. Despite that authority, why is there so much tumult in society? Despite the presence of that authority, why is there so much tumult in society? That is the question that Hobbes is concerned with. So Hobbes is obviously looking at there being something wrong with the nature of authority. So what he has done is he has abstracted the state. He has abstracted political authority. It's like this. If I am sitting in a classroom and teaching you people, and if a teacher is considered to be a figure of authority, if people are getting up and going out, coming in whenever they want, talking amongst themselves, the question that one might ask is, with the teacher sitting in front, if these people are behaving like this, how will they behave in the absence of the teacher or any figure of authority? So that is the question that Hobbes is asking himself. Why is there so much tumult in society despite there being authority? For him, the answer to the question is that there is something completely wrong with the kind of authority that exists or existed in his times. He was unhappy with the nature of authority in his own times. This is the side, the resolutive side that we don't get to see, because he doesn't want to make a dirty presentation. He wants to make a clean presentation. So all these questions that he asks, all the possible answers he attempts to those questions, those, that investigative phase is not shown to you. What is shown to you is his final conclusion. His final conclusion is that we have to change the nature of authority. So the state of nature is not a chronological state. It never existed at any time in the history of human civilization. He created that to make a point, which is that people are fighting. He wanted to make a point about the fundamentality of human nature. Human beings are like this. They have a tendency to fight. They don't live easily as a society. They don't live very easily as a society. So he wanted to change the nature of the authority. So what does he do? I'm not going to talk about the cogito ergo sum principle here because it will take us away from, though it is relevant, but it'll extend the class. He arrived at a rock bottom simple at who a human being is. Okay, please remember that we talked about rock bottom simples. Okay, that resolutive compositive method was also used by René Descartes, who's called a radical skeptic. Why? Because René Descartes wanted to have the proof of his own existence. René Descartes wanted to know, how do I know that I exist? That is his question. Okay. The question is, how do I know that I exist? So he'll say, I'm here sitting in front of the computer. I am talking to someone, and then I'll say that those people, Sai Ujjwala has left, but the other two are still there. I know this. So they also must be having some device through which they are listening to me. So I keep going back till such time that I come to the proposition that I know all this because I'm thinking. And for him, if you say, how do I know I'm thinking? That is a logical contradiction. When you're thinking, how can you ask yourself, how do I know I'm thinking? Right? So the rock bottom simple is, I know I'm thinking, and therefore my thought or the process of my thinking is the proof of my existence, which is in English, I think, therefore I am. In Latin, it is cogito ergo sum. Even in English, there is a word called cogitation. Cogitation is thought. Ergo. Ergo is therefore. Sum, I am. The fact that I'm thinking is proof that I exist. I think, therefore I am. I've cut a long explanation short, but I thought I should tell you this because I'll talk about this in the context of Rousseau and tell you that he has a different take on this. Okay, so I didn't want to leave it out completely. So Hobbes is doing exactly that. He's using this kind of I think, therefore I am. And he's saying that this, now that I have established that I am for real, what I am thinking is also for real, I shall have to suggest an alternative kind of authority to the authority that we have today or in his own time. So he therefore talks about a social contract. The social contract that creates society, the state and the sovereign. The sovereign is the Leviathan. Okay, the sovereign is the Leviathan. He's called him the Leviathan, or one doesn't know. It's like the philosopher king in Plato. You don't know if he's talking about one person or if he's talking about a group of people. In fact, it seems like he's talking about a group of people because he's talking about free breeding among the members of the philosopher king class. So a Leviathan here need not be one person. A Leviathan can be a sovereign. It could be two people, three people. Hobbes is not giving you the specification. Hobbes is only telling you what he wants. He wants a sovereign authority that can control people. And now, in my time, people are not under control. They are fighting with each other. So that is his overriding concern. It doesn't matter if the Leviathan is one person or many persons. But the Leviathan is the sovereign, the supreme power. Now, what does the social contract involve? How do you create this sovereign? Do you say, you are now sovereign and therefore take care of us? No. This sovereign is created by people surrendering all their natural rights. For Hobbes, it is the retention of rights that leads to fighting in society. In the state of nature, if there are 10 apples and 30 people wanting to eat, they fight over that. Scarcity. Greed also. Somebody might want to eat more than others. That is why he talks about those fundamental drives, appetite and aversion. He doesn't say how much of what will satisfy your appetite. What if you have an insatiable appetite? I want more. Like Gandhi so beautifully put it, there is enough in this world for every man's need. There is enough in this world for every man's need, but not for every man's greed. That is what Gandhi said. So Hobbes is also factoring in greed. Okay. So what he is saying is you have to surrender all your rights. Give them to the sovereign. Give them to the Leviathan. And then the Leviathan, in return for having taken away your rights from you, okay, in return for having taken away your rights from you, he will maintain order. And that is how society happens. So the Hobbesian contract is that which generates a state and sovereign first, an authority first, and then the society. That is what makes Hobbes very, very unique. And please don't think, is Hobbes a stupid fellow? He's asking up to give up the rights. At a later stage, I will tell you that there is an instance in the 19th century where the philosopher Edmund Burke, B-U-R-K-E, Edmund Burke, an English philosopher, fell out with his friend Thomas Paine, P-A-I-N-E. Thomas Paine, who wrote the famous book, The Rights of Man, which should be considered as the primary source of all human rights that we talk about today. Okay, Edmund Burke gives us an instance where the British people had said, we are surrendering your rights, our rights to you. They said this to William and Mary of Orange, because the British have a history of changing monarchs. So once the Stuart kings, James II was deposed, they went looking for another monarch. They zeroed in on William and Mary of Orange and asked them to come and occupy the British crown. And they said, listen, your country is full of unrest. Your country, you keep changing kings very frequently. Not just kings, you change dynasties frequently. So people said, no, we surrender our rights to you. We won't revolt against you. But you have to guarantee us peace and tranquility. That came from Hobbes. It came from Hobbes. What happened between Burke and Paine, I'll talk about later, not now. Okay, so there is no right to revolt. As far as Hobbes is concerned, there is absolutely no right to revolt. Why? Because if you revolt against the sovereign, then you go back into the state of nature, which is a war of all against all, and where life will again become solitary, nasty, brutish, and short. If you revolt against the sovereign, that is what happens. So don't revolt against the sovereign. If the sovereign is threatening your life, then yes, you can revolt. That's the only thing he says. But he expects the sovereign not to revolt, not to threaten you with your life, because after all, you have executed a contract with him, essentially, or with that body, with the Leviathan, to protect you, not to threaten you, right? So that is why when you say there is state-sponsored violence, all of us are shocked. We say, how can the state have used violence against its own citizens. We are not shocked by terrorist groups, but if the state becomes a terrorist, then we are shocked, because the state is there to protect its citizens, not to unleash violence upon them. So we get shocked when we hear about state-sponsored violence. Okay, so Hobbes says no revolt against the sovereign. That is why he's considered a proto-liberal. Proto-liberal thinkers. He's got all the makings of a liberal thinker, but he's not yet a liberal thinker. He doesn't become a liberal thinker. The solution that he's giving to the problem is not what a liberal thinker gives as a solution to the problem. And you will understand the difference when we start Locke. But you must remember one thing: the surrendering of the rights. What is it for? For the protection of the individual, for the preservation of the individual. And therefore, Macpherson says Hobbes is not just an individualist, he's a possessive individualist. He's a possessive individualist. For him, what is most important is the protection and guarantee of peaceful life to the individual. That's why he calls him a possessive individualist. So the surrendering of rights is for the sake of preserving the quality of life of the individual. And Hobbes also says social laws are not antithetical to laws of nature, but they are refined. The sovereign refines the laws of nature and converts them into social laws. So in one part of the Leviathan, he says social laws are not repugnant, those are his words, not repugnant to natural laws. They are only refined to suit commodious living of the individuals. That is what he says. Now, Macpherson, I told you, has called him a possessive individualist. Oakeshott says he's not a possessive individualist, maybe. How about looking at him as somebody who's looking at the idea of political obligation? Enlightened citizens who realize that if I fulfill my obligations to my fellow human beings, they will fulfill their obligations to me. So he says political obligation is the priority as far as Hobbes is concerned. But I would tend to go with possessive individualist interpretation, because if at all there was political obligation, if the people of England had shown that they were capable of political obligation without having to surrender all their rights, then this situation wouldn't have come, would it have? It wouldn't have come. That England became enmeshed in different kinds of social political conflicts is indication that people were not feeling a sense of obligation to their social fellow members of society. They were not feeling that obligation. So Macpherson therefore says Oakeshott is wrong. Oakeshott's interpretation cannot be sustained. He wants to create, Hobbes wants to create an authority where you surrender your rights because people are otherwise not able to understand obligation to each other. And therefore, Macpherson is perhaps a lot more accurate than Michael Oakeshott. Now, despite the fact that, he wants to preserve the life of the individual at any cost. So that's not political obligation, it is possessive individualism. Despite him looking like somebody who is suggesting something stupid, I told you the English people actually surrendered their rights. Now, you should also consider him a radical thinker. How many people will have the guts to say, surrender your rights and live peacefully? How many people will say that? Hobbes is a very, very radical thinker. And he suggests something which nobody dared. And as a result of that, he became everyone's enemy. The church didn't like him because he doesn't acknowledge the church at all. He's like Machiavelli. He doesn't talk about God, he's not bothered about God at all. He's not bothered about religious practices. The monarchies were scared. What is he trying to do? He's trying to undermine our power completely. So the monarchies were scared. The monarchs were scared. And even the common people were scared because he's saying, give up your rights. They didn't understand the logic that was there in Hobbes's work because he was so radical and so ahead of his times. The same people whose lives he wanted to preserve were the ones who wanted to burn copies of his book, The Leviathan. They did that. And so Hobbes had to exile himself and travel to with the Cavendish family. I'm sure you've heard of the scientist Cavendish, Cavendish. Cavendish. He traveled with this Cavendish family in France, but his philosophy is very underestimated in India. People do not understand how much of his philosophy influenced how many different kind of people. Even though Locke is somebody who sounds extremely different from Hobbes, he sounds very, very different from Hobbes. But Locke's inspiration is Hobbes. Bentham's inspiration is Hobbes. Edmund Burke's inspiration is Hobbes. And the fact that the people of England actually surrendered their rights to William and Mary of Orange is a testimony to the thinking of Hobbes. Very poor mathematician, unnecessarily pretentious, but he's not a very ordinary political thinker. He's a radical, extraordinary political thinker whose influence on subsequent generations was very, very strong. Very, very strong. When we talk about Rousseau, you will again see that there is one part of Rousseau which completely agrees with Hobbes. But we'll do that when we come to Rousseau. We finished with Hobbes, not the way I would like to, but it's okay. I usually take about a week to do this, but we don't have the time. So tomorrow, when we meet, we will. Uh, you're coming tomorrow, or have you
Yes,
had
sir.
enough? Rakesh? Rakesh has gone away, I think. Okay, so 1 o'clock tomorrow?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so 1 o'clock, I won't take a very long class tomorrow. I'll do an introduction to Locke, and since tomorrow is Saturday, there'll be one day, one break in between. So therefore, I'll just do an introduction